When the general public become involved in the design process, then we start to kind of see again the designer's role in bridging the problem and the end user. This is something we now consider a very important part of user-centered design, universal design as it's known in the United States. We need to address the public's need for comfort, independence and control in their own built environment. This is an image presented by Jeremy Myerson in one of his publications from the Helen Hamlin Centre at the Royal College of Art. The way in which work will be conducted, how we will live in the future, and also the demographics of people working and living longer in life are now becoming critically important parts of how we learn to deal with problems in the future. In Germany, because of the significant depopulation of Eastern Berlin, many big companies that had never even thought about having to change their business models have now had to look at ways to address a much older community than they had ever done before. And that means, of course, looking very closely at user needs and public interests that had never really become part and parcel of making money in these professions. We are living in a changing world, and in particularly, we are starting to see some very, very dramatic shifts in the percentages of children with learning disabilities, for instance. If we think about disability in children in general, children or individuals under 18 in the US, if we take a look at the 5 most significant ailments or disabilities, we might be quite surprised. Respiratory illness, part and parcel of a very, very poor air quality that we have in the built environment these days. You might say that these things have never been given sort of design or architectural form before, but we need to understand how to address these particular problems in our community. In the UK, one way of creating this bridge and helping people to become not only more aware of design, but also how design will subsequently play a role in the future, have been certain organisations such as the Design Council, who have been very, very much involved in creating public awareness of design. Also in the UK, the Council on Architecture and the Built Environment, CABE, has also produced some remarkably accessible types of literature and media that help the general public to better understand the important role they play in their built environment. What's also important is that designers play a role in becoming advocates for design and communicating, creating the bridge between this very complicated process and the general public. Geraldine and Wayne Hemingway, 2 people that essentially began by really operating a market stall, became very, very successful entrepreneurs in the UK in the 1980s, and are considered to be very, very effective media advocates for community design solutions. Wayne Hemingway is now the chairman of an organisation called Building for Life. This is an attempt to really bring public awareness not only to the kind of building of our environment, but also those kind of issues that really we perceive to be the most important motivating factors for designing in the first place. Creating mixes of function in our neighbourhood, looking at site and context as a means of designing responsively to the environments in which we design. Creating environments that feel safe for the diverse age groups that will ultimately live in these places. And very important for us as designers of existing space, interior designers, how we adapt our built environment and not simply build from new. Many of the most successful interior designers in the UK come from a very hands-on background, many from furniture design, in fact. Tom Dixon is an incredibly successful and emerging young designer in the UK who began life as a fabricator of metal, one-off custom furniture. And before that had actually been quite a successful musician. What he's also become aware of is, again, the media perception of design and how we use the media to kind of promote good design. From very unique one-off pieces of custom furniture in the 1980s to today, looking at using new materials and new manufacturing technologies to produce less expensive pieces of furniture. An interesting sort of activity was initiated some years ago now called the Great Chair Grab, where 150 of Tom Dixon's mass-produced furniture pieces were put into Trafalgar Square and encouraged to be taken home by the people who came to Trafalgar Square. What was interesting about the exercise was not only its ability to kind of create awareness of good design, but as you can see in the photograph on the right-hand side, this furniture stayed in place and many people kind of preferred just simply to sit in the furniture in the public realm. The event actually started to make people aware of how pleasant it would be to kind of really bring back spaces in the urban fabric where people could really start to make them their own again. The truly interdisciplinary activity, aiming to kind of create a greater public awareness of design in the general public, there are very few clear business models as to how this will be undertaken. Increasing the range of market users is a new way of creating a business model which can essentially end up with a much different perception about how we buy goods. Chris Anderson's book Free was a fascinating study of how business models all across the field are changing as a result of trying to kind of think business models and practice akin to the way that mass marketing and Google are doing it today. Although this may be a difficult proposition to understand as professional designers, we have to already be cognizant of how quickly the relationship of the architect to the design of the built environment is actually changing. Architects used to be the lead in a design team, without question. The professional services model sustained by the notion that the public interest was front and centre of the architect's responsibility to the project. Architects also used to work on fixed fee basis, which meant there was competition on service only. High building costs equaled good rewards, as one took a particular percentage of the building cost. But today that's no longer the case. The lead role is now completely up for grabs. People are becoming much more savvy about the way that they kind of commission services to be conducted for them. If we think about the way in which we now look for plumbers or builders or electricians, we use a fairly elaborate database that may be a word of mouth kind of system, but it also may rely quite sort of significantly on accessing information through the internet. Not all information on the internet is credible, of course, but basically what we're trying to say is that public access to information has changed radically and people are now much more empowered to make choices on their own. Clients are also adopting alternative procurement methods now. They're looking at different ways of bringing in the people with the right knowledge skills to work with them on their projects, and this is no longer going directly or explicitly through the architectural service provider. If one looks at the most successful architectural, engineering and construction companies these days, we do actually see that already there is a great degree of symbiotic kind of integration of skill sets already at work in making some of the most lucrative and profitable companies around, URS being a great example. What companies like this have done is that they have acquired architectural companies so that they can kind of provide those services within the infrastructure of their own organizations. Many of these companies are enormous, but also looking back at the empire map that we looked at the beginning of the presentation, an interesting thing about these companies is that they have acquired or that they've made their kind of success through acquisition and guaranteeing that their investors are going to receive something in the region of 15% profit per year. This may be as unsustainable as the British Empire was. But what these companies have in common is that they can look to a series of disparate parts and bring them together to make the best possible interdisciplinary composition that they need. Lastly, when we think back to Norman Shaw's concerns about the qualification and experience of registered architects, one only has to look at recent Pritzker Prize winners to be reminded of how important the steady and slow acquisition of knowledge has come to be to really creating truly unique architecture. Peter Zumthor, the Pritzker Prize recipient of 2009, many of you may know, is not a formally trained architect, but a cabinet maker, who over the years of looking at the craft of building became somebody who had a completely different take on how buildings went together. And when asked about the uniqueness of his design approach, Peter Zumthor essentially refers to a word which may be seen in counterpoint to how we perceive architecture today: Baukunst, the art of making buildings. So although we might assume that practice has changed greatly since the days of Norman Shaw in 1851, designers have always really embraced the collaborative process, and this is in part due to a mutual respect for the master and apprentice education that designers and craftsmen received at this time. This is clearly not a time to kind of make the design process restrictive. Today's designers can be proud to embrace many unique attributes that the US brings to the global design industry, and it's my belief that the restrictive nature of professional registration will inevitably be antithetical to a society based on free choice, self-determination, and the predisposition to alternative viewpoints. Thank you.